Honorable Attorney General Connors, the U.S. Department of Justice recently recognized your Department of Missing Children Center Hawaii with the Child Protection Award. Congratulations and thank you for your phenomenal leadership and service in saving the lives of children. Can you tell us some of the success stories of the project and what can children and youth do to be aware and proactive?
I sure can. Thank you. This was a wonderful honor, as you know, that was conferred on our Missing Children Center of Hawaii through the Department of Justice. And the reason it was such a wonderful thing is because it confirmed how important the collaborative efforts that we undertake through this center are in ensuring that our children are safe and that we have a place for resolving criminal conduct that occurs in our state. And the Missing Children Center of Hawaii is fundamental to that collaborative effort. They work with our law enforcement officers, both local police officers as well as FBI, other federal counterparts, and they take information that they get because they're working every day with our social service providers, they're working every day with our communities, and they make sure that information, including when we find out a child is in distress or a child is in harm, gets to the right people so that those children can be looked after, can be found, that people who cause them harm can be brought into the justice system. So they are a perfect example of what it takes to work in this particular space, which is a lot of cooperation, a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of people who really want to protect our children, but our ability to do so effectively means we have to work together. And that's what's so wonderful about the people who were awarded this award, our two directors, Amanda and Kalei. And it also just shows that not only is it important to keep working, even when sometimes the kind of work you do is hard and you see a lot of really sad things happen, you also feel like you can do something about it. And that's what our Missing Children Center of Hawaii does. And they also help get information out there too, right? So it's really important that people know, especially our children, what kind of harms are out there. They need to know how to be safe on the internet. They need to know how to be safe in our community. They need to know what human trafficking looks like. They need to know what grooming looks like and all of those different things. They might be hard topics, but if you can convey them in a way that's compassionate and effective to our children, which our Missing Children Center of Hawaii does, then you will help them also avoid the harms that we're trying to keep them away from.
That's truly helpful. And can you tell us maybe some success stories through this project?
Sure. One was a collaborative investigation that we undertook with our Department of Human Services. So our Department of Human Services handles our foster care system, where some of our children who are in need, who have been taken out of their homes and are now in custody and in the protection of the state, they are some of our most vulnerable children, right? So what had happened is the Missing Children Center of Hawaii got information that some of these children were being trafficked, right? That they were being put into circumstances that were very harmful to them. They took that information, they helped build up with our local law enforcement, with our state investigators, with federal investigators from all across the board, including NCIS, as well as FBI, as well as HSI. And they helped ensure that we could find the children, that they could be taken out of these terrible situations. And then immediately after being taken out, they could get the kind of services that they needed, right? Because they were in the process of being harmed and they needed to receive medical care and treatment. So the Missing Children Center of Hawaii helped not only give us the information we needed to identify these children, but also to make sure that they were taken care of when the criminal justice system started doing its job, because they also saw them through the process and into the hands of the service providers who could help them.
Wow, that's truly inspiring. And so, General Connors, what inspired you to pursue a career in law and become an attorney general? And I guess,
Well,
what was that journey like and some of the ups and downs?
Sure. Well, I always enjoyed being a part of something that was mission oriented. Even when I was in high school, like you, I joined clubs. I was involved in a lot of different things that were geared towards making our community better, our school better, different things that required working with other people as part of a common mission. So I always loved that. In our case as lawyers, we do that, but we do that in the pursuit of justice. So the law is a natural extension of things I always liked doing, even when I was not a lawyer, when I was in high school, when I was in college. I started out my professional career, though, not in the law, but in government. And as you know, I'm a government attorney, and that's a particular type of attorney. It's someone who works on behalf of the public. So before I even went to law school, I was working in the city of New York, the Parks Department. It was right out of college. And I was involved in operations, making sure beaches were clean, that they were open, making sure that parks were clean. I was in the city parks department in particular. And so our mission was to ensure that we delivered a good product to the people of New York City. And it, again, required collaboration, working towards a common goal. It was challenging. I worked really long hours, but I got to see what it was like to be in government service, a part of an institution that was making life better for people living in New York City and enjoyable, right? They want to be in their parks. They want them to be clean. They want them to be safe. And when I got to the end of a 3-year mark, so I'd been with the Parks Department for 3 years, I decided I wanted to learn more about how our systems of government worked, right? The framework, how it is that people interact with each other, how we resolve disputes, how we operate as a community when sometimes people have different ideas about things. And the law and how you resolve disputes seemed like a really interesting area to pursue. So I did that. I went back to law school with the idea that I would probably come back to the city of New York and work maybe in the Parks Department again, just as a lawyer or somebody who could help resolve disputes. But when I was in law school, I learned about the Department of Justice. And I learned about all the different things that the Department of Justice does, including criminal prosecution, litigation over a broad variety of different types of crimes. And I started to think being a litigator was something I wanted to do, being in front of a court, in front of a jury, pursuing justice. That's what the Department of Justice does. And that became something that I decided to do when I was in law school. So I worked for the Department of Justice for a summer. I then eventually, after clerking for a year, leaving law school, I went back to the Department of Justice and was a prosecutor for a number of years. And it was great because once again, I was working in a government institution on behalf of the people of the United States of America, trying to ensure that justice was served, right? That we were keeping people safe from crime, that we were operating in a way that made people trust the government and trust that there were government institutions looking out for them. I've had some ups and downs. So I did a lot of different things. As a lawyer, I haven't just pursued one area of law. Some people just do civil litigation. Some people just do criminal work. I've done a bit of both. And perhaps one of the downs, and I don't think I have downs per se, but maybe one of the things that didn't work out that led to a new path was I had applied to be a federal judge. So under the administration of President Obama, I was asked to think about putting my name in to be a federal judge. And I did that. I thought that would be another very fascinating way to serve, this time in the third branch of government. And I went through the whole process. I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, which was a wonderful experience to go to DC and testify in those great halls. And at the end of the day, Justice Scalia passed away and a number of things entirely out of my control happened, but I ended up not getting the judgeship. So I was disappointed. But on the other hand, I knew that there'd be another opportunity that could come my way. And I got a telephone call about a year after the judgeship, maybe not even that long, maybe just a couple months, from someone in the state administration asking if I would consider being the Attorney General for the state of Hawaii. And it was a wonderful opportunity that I wouldn't have had if I'd become a federal judge. So yes, in certain moments, you might think that there were parts of the journey that didn't go the way you wanted. But if you keep clear about what you want to do, and in my case, serve and be a part of government as best we can, then something else will happen and it will come your way.
That's a truly wonderful story. And I guess, what is your favorite part about being the Attorney General of Hawaii?
My favorite part about being the Attorney General of Hawaii is that I get to be the chief legal officer and law enforcement officer of this great state, which means I get to do everything that has anything to do with law. So if you're someone like me that's done criminal work, civil work, different ways that I've used my legal skills in non-legal environments, I get to be someone who does that every day I walk into the office. And I get to do that with 600 people, a little bit more than that, who are part of this department, over 200 attorneys that work in this department, who are committed every day to ensuring that there's justice in our court system, whether we're doing criminal prosecution, whether we're doing civil litigation, whether we're just providing advice to our clients who could be members of the legislature, who could be members of different departments who are working on behalf of the people of Hawaii. It's a wonderfully fulfilling thing to be able to do every single day. The state is where all roads kind of come together. So you'll be probably aware of the fact that we have the federal government, which is specific jurisdiction. They can't do everything. They only have to do what Congress says they can do. And then you've got local government, which is delegated, right? They do some of the things that the state has delegated to them. But the state is something called general jurisdiction. So we just do everything. We work on the federal level, we work on the local level, but we handle all kinds of issues that might not fit a box in some other category. And that's truly an honor. And it's an honor to be head of the largest law firm in the state of Hawaii too. Most attorneys general offices would probably be the largest law firm equivalent in their department. And that just gives you a tremendous amount of resource to handle issues that are really important to the people of the state that you represent. And that's certainly the case here, right? That we in our state actually are not elected. Attorneys generals in the state of Hawaii are appointed. And I think that's a very unique and really good part of how I fit into state government, because I'm not competing against other elected officials. I'm not competing against people who might be in our legislature or against the governor. In other states, sometimes the governor and the attorney general are in conflict because they're elected separately and might have different missions. But in our state, I just represent everybody, and I can pull people to the table to say, we got to do what's best for the state here. And I can put politics aside in a lot of issues, which can be really hard to do because politicians tend to want to act like politicians. They have platforms that they have to build. They have decisions that they have to justify. But in our case, we can say, that's all good. We can help support you in that mission. But when we want to sit down at the table and kind of work through issues, I can be at the table and say, I'm going to be your lawyer. I'm going to help you. I'm going to work through the issue and not so much any of the other political matters that might be weighing you down or coming into play as well. So I think it's really important to be a lawyer that can help frame the issues so that politicians and policymakers can see their choices more clearly. They can see what lawful choices are available for them to make. And that's a really important role for attorneys. And in my case, the Attorney General and the Department of the Attorney General to be a part of. It's certainly affirmed for me how important government is and how important legal counsel is to the ability of government to function lawfully and well.
And the book, the main idea of this book actually is the rule of law. And so how would you define the rule of law? And how would you define it? How would you define the rule of law and the role of the Attorney General so that teenagers can understand it?
Sure. So the rule of law is about peaceful resolution of disputes and challenges, right? It's about the ability of our government institutions to enact laws through legislation, the first branch of government, to enforce those laws through the executive departments and agencies, which is the second branch, and then to interpret those laws to make sure that they are constitutional and that they are doing what they say they intend to do. And that's the judiciary. All of those different branches of government have to have integrity in their operations and they have to serve the people. And if those institutions are revered, if they operate well, then the rule of law can function and we can have a society that is safe, that is peaceful, and that allows for all of us to engage with each other, to have conversations in safe spaces. So it's really important when we live in society that everyone knows what the rules are, right? If you know when you're about to cross the street that the flashing walking sign means go and the red hand means stop, if you follow those rules, you know you'll be safe, right? You know that there's a certain expectation in society that these rules mean everybody understands how they're supposed to interact with each other, and then that can be followed and people can be safe and move around their business. So when we lose that, right, when we lose a sense of how law factors into our daily interactions with each other, then we're in territory that's scary, right? Then we're in a place where it's not clear what we're supposed to do or how we're supposed to do it. So the rule of law, in my mind, it's something that's supposed to serve all of us living in a community. And it's supposed to be something that we can depend upon so that we can engage peacefully and be able to resolve our differences. And ultimately, as the Attorney General, I'm a part of achieving justice through the operation and respect of the law. I have to be the person who says, this is what the law means, and this is why it is important to follow the law and to respect the law. And I need to ensure that that happens in how we prosecute cases, that people are treated fairly as they move through the system of justice, and that people are treated fairly as laws are being enacted. So when we advise the legislature on constitutional problems with laws that they might be thinking about, or challenges that we're aware might come up, it's our obligation to make sure the legislators know that, so that they don't enact something which isn't a just resolution or might create a situation where people will come to doubt or not want to respect the law. So the ability for the rule of law to flourish in our society is only so good as the ability of good government, or only so is only as good as the ability of government to ensure that those institutions protect the process and protect people who are involved in the various arms of government, or the various roles that we have in the legislature to make sure our laws are good and achieving a good end.
That's very understandable. And under your leadership, the Hawaii office led investigation into opioid manufacturers and distributors, as well as filing suit against Purdue Pharma for the unlawful marketing and selling of opioids. Thank you for fighting such an important issue. How do you and your office pick the cases that you want to pursue?
Well, our fundamental mission is to serve the people of Hawaii and to work with our clients, who are the legislators and who are the heads of our various departments, to be sure that we know what issues are a problem for the people of Hawaii, are creating conflict or doing harm. And when we see harms, we help articulate what those are, right? So the opioid crisis is a really good example. Another one is Juul. We also brought litigation against Juul and various companies there because we saw a harm that was being perpetrated on our youth in particular. And we heard that from our legislators. We heard that from our healthcare providers. We heard that from our schools. So we worked with them to try to articulate what that harm was. And then we used our attorney powers to figure out how to address it. Either we could enact laws, and we've attempted that, or we could take the matter into court and we could litigate it. And when we go into court, what we're doing is we're not only trying to address a harm and to fix it, but we're also trying to achieve accountability. We're also holding people accountable for the things that they've done. And it's a two-way process. When we bring someone into court, whether it's through criminal prosecution or civil liability or civil litigation, like in the case of the opioids and Juul, what we're doing is we're helping people to see how they've created a harm and how they can basically say sorry for it and make up for it and redress the harm. And that's what we do in litigation. And again, that's the function of rule of law that is so important, because we create a safe process, a process that is fair, and everybody can have a space to talk about why they believe what they did is right or wrong and how it should be resolved. So that's what we're doing in these litigation matters, right? That's what we're doing with opioids. That's what we're doing with Juul. We're trying to fix a harm. We're trying to get people into the court system so that they can lawfully address what they've done to hurt people, and then we can ensure that people are better off. And in our case, we want to ensure that our kids are safe from illegal marketing campaigns or dangerous marketing campaigns, and that our people are safe from, in some cases, companies and others who have their interests second to other interests, right?
Thank you so much for protecting the citizens of Hawaii. That's really something great, and I'm truly fascinated by it as well. And could you share, we've talked about a couple, but a legal accomplishment that you are most proud of?
Sure. When you get to the point that I'm at, and you've done a lot of different civil cases and criminal cases, there are some big ones that really can be a source of pride. So there have been some criminal investigations that I led and prosecuted that took years and resulted in some very bad actors having to say sorry and be accountable and take timeouts by serving time in jail. And those are really important cases, as are the civil cases that I've done where we've been able to hold companies liable for their actions in court. But those sort of pale in comparison to everything that we've been doing in my current role as the Attorney General during this COVID-19 response, in ways that we probably couldn't have imagined before everything happened in March of 2020, at least in our state, but certainly across the country as well. We've been asked to go outside of our lane to help the state, the country, the world respond to this crisis in an emergency way, using emergency measures that don't infringe unlawfully on people's rights, that ensure people are taken care of, and that factor in a whole bunch of different concerns during a really scary and kind of uncharted moment in time. So what we can do as attorneys, and what I'm very proud of having done on behalf of this department and with the other attorneys, hundreds of them who've been a part of this process, advising their clients and working with the public, is we've helped frame the legal issues so that, again, we can remove as much uncertainty from the decision makers as possible. So when the governor needs to make a decision, we can come to the table and we can say, Governor, this is lawful. This is a process that you can follow. This is something that we can say you will be able to do, and it will be upheld in court, and it will make a difference in addressing this emergency. We can do the same thing with the Department of Health. The Department of Health, they're, for the most part, public health persons who just want to make sure that people are safe and that everyone has resources so that they can thrive. And now they're confronted with having to say people have to wear masks, or people have to stay at home, or people have to isolate. Those are really difficult things. So we can kind of come in and use our attorney powers again on behalf of the Department of Health and say, we can help you figure out how to enforce this. We can help you frame the conversation so when you're explaining it to the public, they can understand it, and their legal concerns or any of their concerns about their liberties are addressed within a larger context. So we've done that throughout. We've helped the governor issue emergency orders. I've drafted those orders myself, but they have been a collaborative process with a number of different divisions in our department. And then we've also helped defend them in court. And because we did our work on the front end, we've been successful on the back end when we've been in court. And court is a wonderful opportunity to explain why you're doing something, right? Because you take in evidence, you have certain due process type of provisions that are in place, and you can tell the public the reason the law was put into effect like it was is because of X, Y, and Z. And then you have the opportunity to have a judge. For the most part, we haven't had any jury trials, but a judge or some arbiter say, yes, you did that, and it was sensible and it was lawful. And that's been something that's been really hard, because sometimes we've been making decisions that are unprecedented, but because we've been able to rely on our understanding of the law and our relationships with our clients, I think we've done as best a job as we can.
And throughout this interview as well, we've talked about decisions and picking cases. What's one of the toughest decisions you've made as Attorney General, and how did you navigate that challenge?
So I'll answer that in two parts as well. As the Attorney General, I am a director in the state. I have an obligation to ensure that my department runs efficiently, competently. And so sometimes as a manager, I've had to make decisions that are hard. I've had to ask people to, I've had to fire people or ask people not to serve any longer because they were not doing it consistent with our mission, or they weren't doing it in a way that I felt was effective. And those are really hard decisions. So as the Attorney General, I'm also head of a very large institutional framework with a lot of different people. And I have an obligation to ensure that people are doing their job. And I take that very seriously. But those are some of the hardest decisions, right? Personnel decisions are hard, but I have an obligation to ensure that they happen right. Then the second thing I would say is we've had some instances in our state where we have seen events arise outside of the contours of the rule of law. And those have been very challenging. So we had one very significant event in 2019, which was a conflict, a standoff between protesters of a telescope and law enforcement, and those on behalf of the state who had approved the telescope, who had allowed the telescope to go forward, who had checked out all of the different aspects of the permits and ensured that it was going to be economically sound, that it was going to be environmentally safe, and all of these different things. But a group of protesters nonetheless didn't want it to be built, and they blocked the road and created a really dangerous situation that lasted for almost a full year. That was very hard. And it was very hard, not just because you wanted to understand where the protesters were coming from, but you had to be very concerned about the dangerous situation that was created because it was happening outside of the law. The legislature had decided that astronomy is an important priority for the state of Hawaii. They've also made a lot of amends over the years to ensure that our indigenous population, Native Hawaiians, are protected with schools that speak their language and teach their culture, and also different rights within our legal system. And they'd also told the executive department, the second branch of government, that we want you to ensure that there are educational programs up there. We want the University of Hawaii to be up there, and that these are priorities that you are going to execute. And then the judiciary had said, after a lot of litigation, that yes, it is lawful. This can proceed. You can move up the mountain and build this for all these different reasons. But all of this now is happening despite the fact that the rule of law had been carried out. And you had sort of a situation that couldn't easily be resolved in any legal context, because the protesters didn't want to go to court and hear the court say that it was all right for this telescope to be built. So they decided to stay on the road and engage and interact with the law enforcement officers, which was dangerous for the law enforcement officers and dangerous for all the people who were trying to get to work every day, who were on the road. So it created a really difficult situation. And it was difficult in part because communication was hard. Social media was very difficult to manage. It was a situation where the media itself, traditional media, was reporting a lot. And I think of media as the fourth branch of government. They deserve to be treated that way. And they also need to act that way, right? They need to be held accountable and set standards. So it was a very, very tough and confusing time for our entire state. And people, families were really torn apart at their core about this issue. I had Native Hawaiian children writing to me saying, I would like to reach the stars. I want to do so living in Hawaii. But then it was very clear that there were a number of Native Hawaiians who felt this mountain was very significant and that they weren't getting justice in the courts. So it was very complicated. There was no clear path of resolution within the legal system. And eventually the politics had to help us all de-escalate from the mountain. But the issue remains open and it remains unresolved because the telescope is still legal, can still be built, but we couldn't actually get it pulled together. So it required me to be not only the chief law enforcement officer in terms of ensuring that law enforcement was happening safely, but also the legal officer, ensuring that the state of Hawaii, which had said that this is the direction we're going in, felt like they were being adequately represented, as well as the people of Hawaii, who were not all unified in how they felt about this issue. So it was very, very challenging. And it's something that's going to have to continue to be resolved by people who follow me after this.
Yeah, and I think this can flow into one of our other questions. This is a high profile case, I would say, that involves lots of people. And I would say while working with high profile cases, not just like these, but high profile cases in general, do you receive pressure? And if so, how do you handle that?
Sure, we do receive pressure, sometimes from the politicians who are out there trying to actively find a way to resolve it. They might think we should take particular stands in court cases, for example, and they might ask that we say something in court that we don't feel is appropriate or that we feel isn't going to help move the ball forward in the legal context. So we're constantly dealing with politics. We're constantly dealing with the need to communicate effectively. We tend to do a lot of our communicating in court. We think this is where we're going to have our say, this is where it's appropriate. But I think when it's in particular a high profile matter or something that the people of what you're very interested in, we need to communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it. And when there are people who challenge that, we need to ensure that we're handling that transparently, that the conversation is happening in the public discourse. So it's not looking like anyone is pressuring us one way or the other. Because we understand how the law works and our primary obligation is to ensure a lawful outcome, we can always fall back on our attorney powers to do just that. And then to say to the people who are trying to pressure us that we can't legally listen to you or take your input into account because it's happening outside of the context of the litigation or the matter that we're dealing with. So we can say that, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And it's certainly important for us in those kind of instances to make sure that we're controlling the message as best we can, but we're doing so by providing as much information to the public as we possibly can so they understand what's happening.
And so what is one of the biggest obstacles to the rule of law today? And how can we overcome it? And maybe if there is, can you give us an example as well?
That is a great question, and it does dovetail with some of the things we're discussing. I think one of the biggest challenges to the rule of law is social media and disinformation platforms. So the problem with those kinds of platforms is they do the opposite of bringing people together within an institution to resolve their differences peacefully. Social media tends to isolate people. It tends to bring people apart. It does tend to have people with like minds come together and think that they are being affirmed in their ideas in a way that might be untethered from the issue that needs to be addressed. But social media doesn't help us resolve conflict. It brings us further apart and has the conflicting elements more embittered and more isolated. So that's one of the big challenges. We need to be able to live peacefully, to resolve differences, to resolve our disputes. And the inherent tendency of social media is to escalate, to radicalize, to divide, and ultimately to affect our ability for our institutions to operate. We've seen how certain attacks through social media impacted our voting systems. We've seen how it's impacted our ability to get truth out there about different public health measures that are underway. And that's really dangerous. That's really a problem because social media tends to deal in really broad strokes. And so much of what we have to do, especially when we don't agree with each other, is we have to understand the nuances. We have to understand the facts. We have to be in the same room together where we're actually having a discussion and a discourse. And we need a safe place to do that. A courtroom is a safe place to do that. Social media is not a safe place to do that. And some of the upshots that we can see coming from these effects of social media are January 6th and other sort of conflicts that we see because they're fomented in a place that's not tied to any system of resolving the dispute that underlies everything. So if you didn't believe in the electoral process and how that worked, there's a process for resolving that. And it's in the court system. And that was happening. But all of these social media elements were so untied to that, that they couldn't appreciate that their concerns were being addressed, were being litigated, and were being determined not to be as bad as they thought, or not to be as they thought, right? That the facts were wrong. So we really are challenged by that. I think some of the ways that we can address them and some of the ways our department is doing that is to create spaces that are not in the social media space. If social media can help us create those spaces, that would be wonderful. If we could figure out how to change algorithms, if we could figure out how to incentivize the companies that run some of these platforms to create safe spaces, then maybe we'll get there within the social media context. But other than that, we have to make sure we're pulling people out of the somewhat tunnel type of roads that they can fall down in social media so that they're actually engaging with each other and working through dispute processes and actually getting to a place where they're not just angry, but they're feeling like they're heard and they're feeling like their concerns are being addressed. So we have to do that. We have a divided communities project that we're working on. In our department, we have a commission to promote civic education that we're working on. All of these different efforts are for that very purpose, to create places where people can understand how government works, how they can engage in it lawfully, and how they can understand that if they have disagreements, there are places that they can bring those disagreements that have due process and ultimately will lead to a just outcome.
Yeah, as a teenager, I think I can definitely understand social media misinformation, and I think that's very factual as well. And back in 2020, you led the coalition of state and territorial attorneys general in urging Congress to expand funding for crime victims. The Crime Victim Fund Act of 2021 was passed 100-0 in a U.S. Senate vote. It provides steady funding for victims, government nonprofits, service providers, and state CVCC that provide crucial victim service. Can you tell us more about what led to this initiative and the success of the program?
Sure. So this had been something that we were working on for a long time. The need to ensure that our victims are compensated, that once they have been brought into the criminal justice system, that they are protected, that they are looked after, and that they have the resources available to them to be able to thrive once the case is adjudicated or once the person who harmed them is behind jail or behind bars. It's fundamental to our ability to ensure that victims can actually heal. So for many years, there had been this disjuncture in the law where the intent was clear, we thought, where we wanted to ensure that services and that money was getting to the right people in the right way. But there was a discordance in the law, and that's our obligation as attorneys general, to help identify when certain parts of the law aren't working the way they're supposed to. And sometimes the people who are making the laws don't know about it because they're not necessarily the ones on the ground executing the laws or benefiting from the laws or seeing the challenges in the law. So this was something we'd been trying to do for years. It just turned out that in this particular year, we had enough support from the Senate. We had enough clarity in terms of what had to happen to ensure that the fix could be instituted and that it could get the overwhelming support it did, so that we would be able to do what everybody wants to do, which is to support victims and ensure that all these different funding services are available. So that's our role. That's a great example of how we can come together. And I work every day with my fellow state attorneys general. So it's a collaborative effort that we need to ensure we can do, because we need to be talking, right? If you have 56 attorneys general, for example, behind an issue, someone's going to have to pay attention to that issue, right? Because 56 of us couldn't be wrong about what's important here. Even if sometimes we have 30, 35, 40 of us who are raising an issue collaboratively, cooperatively, then that's something that people need to take note of. And you need to say that there's an issue here that the state attorneys generals believe is important, and it's time to look at that. So that's what happened in that instance. And it was a great success. And it was the product of a lot of cooperation amongst a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea and a great effort as well. So thank you for that. And what are the opportunities for high school students in Hawaii to be involved and learn more about the Attorney General's office?
Well, our office is about government, right? Our office is about understanding how government works. And to the extent that people are interested in understanding how government works and how we as attorneys work, it's important to follow what we do. We issue press releases, we run programs, we tweet occasionally about different issues. And it's important, I think, for students to know what their state attorneys general office is doing. We provide a number of programs to the public. We provide grants that affect people's lives in really important ways. And it's just important to know that we're out there fighting for people on the consumer protection issue, that we really are fighting for the safety and security and protection of our children, especially when it comes to internet and internet access and all the different pitfalls that can happen when you're moving about the internet. And it's just important for people to know that there are ways to engage with our office. We have high school students who've come to work with us over the summer. We've opened our doors to welcome people who want to be a part of working on behalf of the department to come in and do so on a volunteer basis. And it's something that I would encourage people to think about. The Office of the Attorney General, or the Department of the Attorney General in your state, is doing some really important things. And to get a sense of it, and to get a sense of what public service is actually like, it would behoove you to see what kinds of internships or programs might exist out there.
Yeah, and what do you think about the future of law, both in terms of career and in terms of implementation of the law 10 years from now?
I think the future of the legal profession is very promising. I've had the opportunity to hire a lot of wonderful attorneys since I've been the Attorney General. I also work with our university law school, and I see the kind of people who want to become lawyers. I think it's a very promising future, because we are a profession that is about helping people, serving people. That's what we do. We have clients. We're there to ensure that people can heal when they've been broken by somebody's negligence or when they've been the victim of a crime. We are there to ensure that we can use our legal skills to help people. And that will never change. In fact, it only becomes more important now that we think about the law as a way to help people live in a society that can be productive, to work with each other. When we're in conversations with people, we're oftentimes thinking about other sides so that we can help parties come together and resolve their disputes as opposed to stay on their own side. That is going to be a skill set that'll be important, whether you're a litigator, whether you're a legislator, whether you're someone working for a nonprofit. We tend to be the people who have a skill set to come into a crisis and to be able to help frame the path to move out of that crisis, to resolve things and to problem solve. And never more than now, I think, is the law and a legal background more important to helping us achieve those larger aims.
An estimated of 34 million people in the US have no access to any legal services. How do you think that we can help them?
The first thing we have to do is we have to recognize the importance of legal counsel, right? We have to recognize that when people are in the justice system, or when people are trying to make sure they didn't lose their house, or trying to make sure that they have a TRO against someone who is harming them, that they understand that the law and a lawyer is going to help them. And we need to make sure that our society understands the importance of that too. Anytime you're in a case, it's always better if the other side has counsel, because you have somebody who is not the victim. You have somebody who is not the person on the other side who is being a guide, who is being someone to say, you don't necessarily need to know the law. You just need to know what happened to you, and we'll figure out how to help you move through this system. And so if you've got someone on the other side who can help their client move through the system better, everybody benefits, and it's a better resolution. So people deserve and they should have legal representation. The first thing we got to do is recognize the importance of that. And the second thing is we need to make sure that bars across the country, that the legal societies have an emphasis on that too. There needs to be a priority on pro bono work. We need to ensure that access to justice is something that the courts support, whether opening up a part of the judiciary to ensure that legal services can be provided, and that it's an institutionalized commitment. And if we can get there, then it'll become an expectation, and then it'll become something that people will have more and greater access to.
I think that's a great solution. And what is your advice for teens and youth that aspire to pursue a career in law and or maybe become the future attorney general?
A couple things. So, well, more than a couple. I think first of all, at your age, you should try everything. You should just get involved in things that interest you. I hear you write for the paper. Being able to write and be able to being someone who can take stories and ensure that they're accurately and purposefully presented to the public is really important. You want to develop a couple of just basic skills. You want to be able to talk in public. You want to be able to write well and persuasively, and you want to be sure to get involved in issues that are happening around you. You also want to become a student of leadership. You always want to be asking how you can become a better leader, a big leader or a small leader, just somebody who can help people resolve problems or resolve issues, or just be someone who can guide another person through a moment in their lives. And being a lawyer helps you do that. When you study leadership, which you should, reading books, looking at examples, when you see people who are in high profile positions, identify what you like about what they do and what you don't, you'll come to understand that leadership is really about having a core competency, about having compassion for people, and being humble about your ability to make change. In life, you'll come to understand that everything you do is just a series of decisions you make. And every decision you make should be something you've really thought about, something that you have looked inside when you are making a decision to think about whether it's right for you, and that you've looked outside, that you've talked to your parents, that you've talked to your teachers, so that every decision you make, you can look back on and say, yeah, that was the right decision for the right time. And as you move through life, you'll get better at making decisions. You'll get better at understanding who you are and why you're doing things. You'll get more people who can be resources for you. But in all of those things, you just want to make sure that you're making decisions that you feel good about. And then you can look back and say, yes, I've made decisions that have been good in my life. And you should just get out there and try public service. You should get out there and work for a government institution. There's all different kinds, right? You can work for a nonprofit, but that's different than working in a government type of situation. And as attorneys generals, that's what we do. We are the protectors of institutions. We ensure that these institutions exist to help people live with each other in peace, and that these institutions work. We have to protect those institutions and make sure the people who are working in them are good, that they are competent, that they are ethical. And if we can ensure as attorneys generals that these institutions are good and that they're working, we'll have done a great service. And that is something that anybody should be proud to be a part of.
That's wonderful advice. And thank you so much for your time, Attorney General Scott.
Sure, sure. Well,